Kevin Hoover is a business consultant and coach who helps entrepreneurs grow their businesses through strategic consulting, coaching, and creative services. In this episode, you will learn how Kevin overcame personal struggles like his son's cancer diagnosis, the challenges he faced in early business, and how embracing failures and being openly vulnerable with clients helped him redefine his purpose in helping other entrepreneurs. You'll also gain insights from Kevin on the importance of finding what truly motivates you beyond just money and having the courage to be your authentic self in business.
I struggle with entrepreneurs who say I run a successful business without talking about all the trash businesses that they've run, not literal trash, but like ones that didn't make it. You know, wow, that was a young and dumb decision doing that. So yes, I've made my living signing my own checks for almost a decade, and I'm proud of that. But in that, there came a lot of bumps in the road, a lot of failures, a lot of let's try that, and it didn't work and cost me a ton of money, and you have to move on. So yeah, I do want to acknowledge that there's a duality there. With every successful entrepreneur, there's a whole string of failures kind of they're toting behind them in those lessons. So that's kind of where I sit right now.
Yeah. And what were those businesses you were running? What did they look like? Why did you start them? Because you said you've been running your own businesses or paying your own checks for the last 10 years. You know, that's a very long time. And it's full of successes and failures, like you said. But I want to know what the kind of career journey you had as an entrepreneur looked like.
So I was in corporate hospitality working basically restaurants and hotels. I was in the corporate side of things, but it didn't change the hours. My hours were still working at night, working holidays, long weekends, 70 hours a week, some weeks. And I got married and we were thinking about starting a family. I said, well, I don't want to start a family when I'm working and traveling and doing all the things. And so I said, I think I'm going to start my own business. So I had the great idea to start a photography and video business. And I didn't go to school for that. I had YouTube University in my hip pocket, and I watched all the videos and finally bought a camera and started that up. And it was just this really aggressive throw into business where it's like, okay, the pictures are one thing, but it's actually a business and there's contracts and things like that. And so I started that. After that, I started working with a local distillery. We actually funded a spirits division of a distillery here, and we were going to sell our wares, our vodkas and our whiskeys and things like that. And that is, as you probably know, is a saturated market. It's very expensive to get into. And so that was my next failure. And then I got into real estate, and I was moderately successful with that. And but I was building a brand. I found out that it really had nothing to do with what I knew about real estate. It's kind of like you study for this thing, and you get all the information about it, and then you get in the real world, and you're like, no one cares what I know. They only care how good of a marketer I am. And so while I wouldn't classify that as a failure, I would say that it was one that I got into optimistically, and I did not enjoy it as much as I thought. And then that finally led me to what I'm doing now, which is more of a consulting kind of position.
And what was the kind of thing you were pursuing while you were doing these different business ventures? Because it's like photography to alcohol to real estate. There's no clear connecting line apart from the fact that you were doing them. So zero, just where were you finding these ideas? They were just people kind of up to you saying this and that, or you kind of just were researching and found these types of things?
Yeah, I mean, the more you know people, the more you're in business, you kind of get to know other people, and they say, hey, wow, why don't you help me with this? And why don't you help me with that? And so those relationships just started to come organically. And I think once I realized that photography was going to be a really tough go for a business for me, the iPhone was coming into play. People were, looking to spend less. And it was a real weird time for someone who was like me, who wasn't already established as a really skilled photographer, because I would never say that about me, even when I was doing it for money. I would say I was capturing moments, but I wasn't a skilled photographer. And so there's no sustainability in that. So someone would come and say, why don't you do this? And I would say, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Let me migrate and try that. And that happened a few times. And then really I kind of started just by process of elimination, just comprising, what am I good at? What do I enjoy to do? And where can I help people the most? And started asking those questions. And that kind of narrowed it into the consulting and coaching world, which I'd gotten into a little bit earlier.
And your kind of starting point for going into entrepreneurship was the fact that you were trying to build a family and be a present dad, in that working at night wasn't ideal, so you need to do something that was a bit more flexible so you could be a present dad and be around and, you know, take care of your family and that kind of thing and still provide. But there was a moment for you where you kind of questioned your relationship with your life and your business. I wonder if you can talk me through what that time was like in your life and what was going on for you and, you know, what happened afterwards.
Yeah, it was. Unfortunately, this probably won't be a short answer to a question. But,
that's not a problem at all.
But I do think it's important to have the context of that. So I had started my current business in 2018, and the first year of any business, it really is, you're figuring out how to survive. You're really fighting it out. You're getting your name out there. Any business, it doesn't matter how much experience you have. The first year in business, just survive that year. You're going to learn so much. You may not make the big money you're hoping for or have the lifestyle you want, but you're going to learn so much. So I finished my first year in business almost to the day. And that was, my son was then 4 years old. The money was starting to show up. So we were living comfortable. You know, we could afford the extra ice cream on Saturday if we wanted. And it was really good. And then almost a year to the day, my son was having a tummy ache. And over the process of probably a few days, it went from tummy ache to he had to be life flighted with total kidney failure and a tumor in his abdomen. And so up until then, it was very clear like what I wanted business to be. And I always have to do this. I have to say spoiler alert for everyone, because this is not a sad story. This is a story of celebration. My son is now 9. He's an honor roll student in 3rd grade U.S. And he's really changed my life in many, many ways that he can't fathom at 9 years old, but one day he will understand and he'll get it. So I do want to say that, because I reflect a lot about what did I learn in that time, but that was the day that, you know, things made the least sense but started to make the most sense. And so he was life flighted. We went into pediatric cancer treatment. Our prescription for that was about 70 weeks of chemotherapy. It was about 45 sessions of radiation. It was going to be a really tough couple years. And so we just committed to it. And through that process, I questioned everything, really, if I'm being honest. My faith, my marriage, me. I questioned everything top to bottom, and especially my business. But as I was working, so I'm consulting and coaching these folks, and I'm doing it from the hospital, from the chapel, from the park, from the car, the hotels, wherever we were getting treatment, that's where I worked. And people just kept showing up, and I kept talking and kept sharing and kept discovering and kept digging and searching. And some of the most beautiful relationships were formed during that time, professionally, because I think people saw me as not this marketer who was marketing his wares and, you know, marketing himself. You know, I had no choice but to just be honest and to cry and to live and to work hard and it still not be good enough. And I had no choice but to be mad and to not feel like it and to cancel appointments. You know, there was a few times where I had to call my clients, more than a few times, and just tell them, but based on the nature of work we do, and just tell them I can't meet today. You know, I'm sitting in a hospital and we're waiting on results, and my brain and my body and my spirit would be anywhere except our conversation. And luckily I was met with a bunch of grace. I was met with some forgiveness, understanding, empathy. I was met with all the things you hope you would be met with during those hard times in life. And it just really opened up a really beautiful aspect of how do I really help people? Outside of telling people how to make a lot of money, which I can do and I've done and I still do, but how do I really help people? And it started by me helping myself. And, you know, there was one particular night we were in the hospital. We had gotten a fever. My son had gotten a fever. We had to get in the ambulance in the middle of the night, drive 2 hours. And the next night, he ended up being fine. They were able to give him some medicine. The next night, by the time I realized like I was awake, I was in the bathroom floor in a ball, just crying uncontrollably, just sobbing. Everything had just kind of caught up with me. And it's in that moment, you know, or moments like that, you know, it doesn't have to be that severe, but it's in that moment where you're really like, why am I doing this? All of it. Why am I doing any of this? what is the bigger picture? Is this, and I think, a lot of people, and I kind of force the answer to this question for entrepreneurs, when you say, why are you doing this? The first answer should be the money. It just, let's be honest.
That's why we work, to make money.
That's why we work. Yeah, it should be the money. And I think people they skate by that by saying, I really want to help people. And I have no doubt you should help people 100%. But if you're going to start a business, you don't have a mission in life unless you have a margin, meaning, if you're not turning a profit or moving the need or giving the resources around you that you need, your mission is never going to be fulfilled. And so I really started questioning that aspect of my life. Was I just really good at presenting the version of me that people wanted to see, or that I thought they wanted to see, or that I could sell, or sitting in that bathroom floor crying, fully exposed, just raw, vulnerable, broken, overwhelmed, burnout. No decision was the right decision from where I sat in that moment. And just really sitting there and there was only one way to look, and that was up. There was you couldn't, some people in the world of addiction, they call it rock bottom. There is an emotional rock bottom, I believe. When you're experiencing crisis or burnout, there's a point where you sink so far down, you've kind of suppressed and you've kind of covered over everything so far. There's just no way to go except pick yourself up, or, a worse situation certainly could come about. So I sat there on the floor of the bathroom and just started asking questions. And of course, I eventually got up, but I kept asking questions. And some of the things that I got to, as I reflected on that, so we finished treatment and we're done. I'm sitting with my son, who was at that time 6, and I said, "What did I just learn? That was not for nothing. My son beat the monster. He beat cancer, continues to beat cancer. Well, for the rest of his life, he'll be beating cancer. But what did I just learn?" And that's where the idea of NextCrest started, and it really came about that one of the things I did well, I kept my son throughout his treatment. I kept him looking forward to something. He kept looking for what is next. Oh, in an hour we're going to play down in the playroom. Oh, in 30 minutes we get to go have hamburgers, or in 20 minutes we're going to watch my show. It was always like never having him sit in the present moment too far, always having a vision for what's coming for him. And the phrase that came up in that moment, in that time for him, was, "We're healing." So our little secret handshake between dad and son it was never about, "We're dying here. We're not sick. We're healing." There's a difference. You're 5. You got to understand this. We're healing. We're not sick. And that was kind of gearing him up to his purpose of why are we here in the hospital? It's we're healing. And it's the depth that you have to go through. Looking back, I was just living life in that moment, and it was hard, and I lived it because I had to. But now, years later, I look back and I go, wow, that was a really dark, deep, heavy kind of couple years. But now I can learn what I was intended to learn from it. And it was if you treat everything like I need to find what's next, because in this hole, in this darkness, I can't see what's next. But if I could just find what's next, not a big grand what's next, but oh wow, at 2:30 the game comes on and I get to watch my club play, and that makes me happy. So I got 2:30, to that's what's next for me. And that just became the practice. And anytime crisis comes up with anyone, I can almost always say that it's not that it's a crisis per se, that we've lost the vision of what's next, and we don't have anything that's moving us forward. So that was the point where, luckily, I'm very grateful to say that through all those questions and all that struggle, I'm here now to help and help other people go through their version of that, perhaps. But everything that was taught to me by a 4-year-old. And I'm grateful for it. I really am.
It's crazy to think the lessons you can learn from someone who has, next to no life experience, and how that can impact you as a full-blown adult. And one thing that I kind of picked up on from what you said earlier is that you were being a human in your business. You were showing up authentically. You were saying to people hey, listen, I've got a lot going on right now, and it's not, some airy-fairy made-up thing. My son is sick. I need to focus on this, and I also want to be able to give you the best of me, or the best of me that I can for now. So unfortunately today or this week I'm not available, but when I am, just know that I'm fully present with you and able to fully show up in business. So hats off to you for that. Full commendations on that. But as well, when you spoke about being on the floor crying. For me, I understand that exact kind of way of being. Like, you've tried to be strong for so long, and now you've hit rock bottom. But the crazy part is you find out that rock bottom has a basement. And in that basement, you now can't get out. There's no ladder, there's no stairs. You're struggling to, just exist. And when you're in that state, you're kind of like, okay, how do I get out of this? Or you can kind of just pace around and be stuck in these, this negative dark void, like you said. And the fact that you've got this mission with Next Crest, which is having a goal, having a future plan, whether it's, half an hour from now, half a day from now, a week, a year from now, that is something that gets you out of that panic state, that reactive state. It gets you into a state of mindfulness. And even though people think mindfulness is that whole idea of have no thoughts, be one with yourself, all that kind of stuff, mindfulness is being able to be present as well as make plans for your future. And it's a long process to go through mindfulness. I'm sure you've been through some types of mindfulness practice. You said you questioned your faith and all that kind of stuff, and faith includes big elements of mindfulness. But for you, with your business with Next Crest, you said that people are struggling to find out what's next. They're kind of stuck in this state of paralysis. And so I'm wondering, what are the kind of common struggles, common challenges that you find that your clients have during midlife crisis or just crisis in general?
That's a great question. And I think that is you said something really that hit me, and it's like when you find your lowest has a lower. When the bottom has a basement, it's kind of interesting. But if you really look at the idea of mindfulness and how we think of ourselves and the subconscious mind and harnessing all of those things, it's like, well, if that's true, then also the reverse also should be true, that our ceiling also has a higher, and that's really when we start to look at potential and start to feel these things. So if you feel like you're not operating to your potential, or like you are capable of more, that's a different version of the same thing. Of you're not at your lowest, but you're also not at your highest, and that is creating this sort of feeling in you at this crisis mode. And so the midlife crisis is I think it's a little unique because it normally comes with people who have replaced their dreams with practicality. They've replaced their hopes with fears. They've replaced their aspirations or their potential with settling. And they've kind of resigned to the fact that this is just the way life is. This is how it's going to be. That the idea that work exists so that we suffer, and you just have to suffer through your job. I think those days are coming to an end slowly, but still there's a question of how. By and large, all of the people selling things on TikTok are a very small percentage of people who are making a living selling things on TikTok. And you see it and I see it, where people come out of the woodwork and they say, I'm teaching people how to make money online, for instance. And then you do a little digging and they've not made very much money online. Is that my teacher? And you've got to give me more of the story. And so I do think with the work that I do, I always revert back to what I've been through and how that is shaping me now so that I can understand. I have clients of all age demographics. I certainly work with crisis in different times, and you and I were talking about this a little earlier, is that the crisis itself, the process to get out of the crisis is pretty similar, no matter how old you are, be it 9 years old or 59 years old. It's pretty similar, but we really want to look at like what brought on the crisis. And normally that's lack of vision, meaning I accepted this job, this role, and I don't know where it's going. And my question would be, then why did you accept the role? Like, what was it? It's the money. It had to be the money. And there's no other reason. Yeah. And that's okay. That's fine. Let's just own it, which means our search is not over. We've got this thing that helps us live a little more comfortably while we continue to look for the next thing. And if we don't continue looking for the next thing, we stay in that position that we, at the core, really took for the paycheck, for the money. And we're trying to make purpose out of it and do that for 10 years and see where it leaves you. It leaves you broken. It leaves you exhausted. You've been hustled to death. You've worked your best work and no one's taken notice of it. And that's really what creates that kind of crisis. And I think that's where people, by and large, myself included, we really think that we shouldn't be going through that. And then we're surprised when we are. And then there's no book that says, well, here's what you do next if you find yourself going through that. So for me, it was really sitting, that story of the bathroom floor, that was a tipping point for me. That was a pivotal moment of, I've got a lot of things I can't be right now. And sitting on the bathroom floor all day is one of them. I can sit on the bathroom floor for an hour. No problem. I need that. But I can't be here all day because there's a 5-year-old in the next room who's relying on dad to get up and tell him what to do next. My wife is in the other room. She's relying on me to show up to give her a little break, to give her some teammate support. So she might need to go cry on the floor. There's my business and my clients who are, really keeping us out of bankruptcy. And I need to show up for them fully, which means I need to be incredibly honest, more honest than I've ever been in my life. And so I think when you look at all those things that are going, when you hit the point of a crisis that's not, we didn't choose cancer. That was a crisis that was kind of thrust upon us. But no doubt my business was going to head for a crisis anyway, whether I wanted to or not, because it wasn't operating the way it is now. And so I think that's where we can step back and take a look and say, what is this for? Like, what is, even down to the minutia. And so I tell people all the time, especially leaders, CEOs, C-suite, team leaders, I say, if you're going to have a meeting, you need to explain to people what the meeting is for, right? And if not, we're just having meetings on meetings on meetings, and there's nothing achieved. We're just kind of punching a clock going into these meetings. And then think about it. How often do we do that with ourselves? How often do you have quiet time, mindfulness time, and your only thought is not to have a thought? I've studied meditation for years. I've used it. I've become certified in meditation theories and all the things you can do, whatever that means. I don't even know what certified in meditation means, but one of the things that, in my opinion, that mindful practice is having an empty brain. That mindful practice to me in my world is sit with myself as long as I can. When my brain goes somewhere I'm choosing for it not to go, the muscle that I'm building is bringing it back to that current moment. And that's not my idea at all, but that's how I approach it, because my brain is all over the place. If I'm trying to meditate in a cancer hospital, it's very hard. It's very hard. So you have to give yourself those windows. So that's kind of how I look at the progression. If you're going to deal with the spotlight, you kind of have to deal with the behind the scenes. And if you're going to take your picture at the peak of the mountain after you've climbed it, you better take pictures as you're climbing up the mountain and remember that journey and document that journey. If all I see is you winning at the peak, yay, we did it, that's not inspiring to me. I'll be impressed and I'll celebrate you and I'll clap for you. But if you really want to inspire me, show me what you've been through to get there. And that's kind of how I reverse engineered kind of what I'm doing now, is that I'm very much a practitioner of my own work. And I try to let people know that, hey, I'm not speaking from the top of the mountain. I might be at the next, little base camp or whatever, but I'm going through my version of toughness even now, even though I've already been through it. And so is everyone else. And so I think once we get to that point of realizing that business is not perfect, it's not the shiny ball that we polish and throw into the world and everyone goes, oh, look at that, you did a wonderful job. We certainly want that. But I think when we find that space to truly be ourselves, to truly say, today, I don't feel like it. And to truly say, you know what, I've been broken so far, I need a minute. And I don't have all the answers, but I have more questions that might lead us to the answer. I think that was so freeing for me. It kind of liberated me in many, many ways that I don't think I would have gotten to otherwise.
Mm. And something else that you did that I'm not sure if you're conscious of this is, but you said to yourself and your son, we're not in this hospital being sick, we're here healing. And from my understanding, this is something you've brought to Next Crest. So even though the term that you have to say for people to understand what's going on is midlife crisis, you flipped it into midlife awakening, which is such a powerful thing. A lot of people say, oh, I had a breakdown. And then a couple other coaches I spoke to is like, no, this is a breakthrough. You should be happy that you had this moment of weakness so that you can change your focus, change direction, and go in a direction that's much better for you. Because otherwise you could just slowly, walk to your grave, not in a happy way, just getting by, putting up with your life type thing. So I'm wondering for you, if you can talk me through the concept of midlife awakenings now, as opposed to having a midlife crisis.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with the midlife crisis and the cliches that it kind of brings with it. We normally it's around a male figure who's trading in the wife for the younger girlfriend in the sports car and the clothes that don't look there, that aren't age appropriate, and the behaviors, and that's normally what we think of. And I think that we certainly see that quite a bit. But the awakening part really happens when normally, for most people, I think. Your midlife is around the time where you've tolerated enough. You've put up with it long enough. And you're finally able to say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And you might have made a little money. You might have, gotten married, bought the house, had a family. You might have the exact car you want. You might have the job. All these things kind of come into play. But the awakening part is really when you wake up and say, it's time for me to claim my desires in life. And in a way that we're not taught to. The minute we're born, we're taught to. I remember this so vividly when I was young. We would go out to eat with my parents, and my mom and dad would, shh, sit down, be quiet. See that little boy over there? Behave just like, look how good he's being over there in that other table. You should be like that. And what does that do over time? That just creates this person that doesn't have any claim of what they truly want in life. And so I think the awakening comes normally around the time where you've had too much, and we've all been there. And doesn't have to be at midlife. We've been there in the relationship where, I've put up with you long enough. I can't carry this relationship. I put up with the business partnership long enough. I can't keep working in ethics that aren't mine, or I can't keep operating out of integrity, or I want to be a nice person, and I don't want people to suffer. So I don't want to sell them things that I know won't help them. And so I think we all get to that point of the crisis is that it's a very small point where you say inside of yourself somewhere, I've had enough. And then the point between saying that and actually doing something about it, that's the crisis. So it is that decision to action. In my world, I say the point, but it's not my quote, so I can't claim it, but it is something I use. The point between decision and action is suffering. So the moment you decide, and then the space between that decision and the time you do something, that is suffering. That is also the crisis. So if we look at decision not as a decision, but as an awakening, and then we decide how long it takes for us to act on that decision, that's the secret sauce. That's the purpose of life. We all know on the things that we've made a decision on, and then we don't do it, and it's suffering until we actually do something about it, and then we go, oh. And normally it's not as bad as we thought, so I think that's kind of how I look at it. If you're going to have a lot of time between your decision and your actions, there will be a crisis. No matter how old you are, no matter what you're going through, there will be a crisis. And the point where you decide and then you act. So in my case, when I was with my son, the minute I decided this is healing, then a string of decisions came after that. And it was, okay, document your story, share with people. Right. And so I would record my podcast very unlike this, where it's professional. You and I have done a little homework. We know the relationship. It's a good environment. I was recording my podcast from a bus between the hotel and the hospital, unedited, and just getting it out there, and just sharing at the time. But that was healing for me. That was decision and action playing in the same space. And then after that, we started a nonprofit, and we started focusing our attention on healing more people, helping more people heal, and sharing that word. And so that action became a very powerful way of us tolerating what we were going through. And so I think if you think of it like that, the awakening part, there's no formula, there's no process behind it. All you have to do is really consider this, that once you decide something, the next month is going to be a crisis or an awakening. And you don't decide that until you decide what to do and then do it. And that sounds very cliche, and that's very not how I market, but it is. If I had never gotten up off the bathroom floor, where would my son be today? I don't know. I like, he's a strong guy. He's a very powerful little guy, but I know that I was there for him if he needed me. And that's my job as a dad. My job as a dad is not to carry him through his life. My job as a dad is to be available. And if I had never gotten off the floor, I would not have been available. And now my son asks me questions like, how close to dying was I? And I can be honest with him, and I can share with him, because I've done the work. I've kind of sat in that place, but I've decided this is an awakening, not a crisis. So questions like that don't scare me, because I made the decision and then I acted on it in some really insane ways. And that allows me to have the conversation from integrity of, let's create an awakening out of this. What's the first thing that needs to happen for this not to be a crisis anymore, for it to be our awakening? And I find that that's also something I continue to go through in my life in different incarnations, where every little thing, my garden out back, last year it was a crisis because I didn't plant it on time. I was trying to catch up to the seasons. I was doing, it was a crisis, but I kept going. And so now this year, what's happening? I've already got them planted. I've got my seeds planted where I am. It's about to be spring. So I'm ahead of the game a little bit because of what I learned from being behind. So my crisis actually led to, now I'm optimistic that this year we'll have some fresh food coming to our table from our little garden out back. But I do think that's it. I think we have the choice of crisis or awakening, and it all has to do with the minute you feel like you've decided in your heart. I know that relationship's not right. I know that partnership's not going to work. I know that's too much money. I know that's not a good event for me to speak at. I know that's not the name of my book. I know that client is not right for me, that they need to do this, and this, and then come to me, or they've already graduated. That honesty, that really creates the awakening as opposed to the crisis. And that's been a powerful tool for me.
Yeah. And there's an element of, personal development or personal growth in that, right? It's one of those things where if you don't work on yourself to be the best version of yourself possible, when you show up to work or family commitments or, like you said, even your garden, you're not going to do your best work. You're not going to be the best version of you. And it can feel almost selfish to do personal development work, especially when you're in that reactive state. When you're being reactive, you're just doing what you can when you can. But when you're in that state of constant personal development, constant personal growth, a lot of people will say, well, how can I balance going to the gym and meditating and drinking, 2 gallons of water a day and all this kind of stuff in my life? It's like, you don't have to balance the two or, find work-life balance. It is who you are. You live in that way. Do you know what I mean? And I'm wondering for you what it's like to kind of find that harmony between all these things in order to become like a holistically healthier person. So, personal development's there, business is there, your family's there. How do you find that kind of, that nice balance, harmony, or, cohesion between all of them?
I think if I could concisely answer that for everyone on the planet, I would live on an island by myself and no one would ever hear from me again. I'd have enough money to do that. Right? But
yeah, so that's the easy option.
That's the easy option. Yeah. But I think work-life balance obviously is a big topic around the work I do, and it's obviously a big, it's something we all want. But I think I'm going to be careful with my words because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I do think it's important, but I also think it alludes more to what you were talking about, that we don't have this compartmentalization of our lives very much anymore, where back in, 50 years ago, you may have been able to go to work, and then the next time anyone was able to get a hold of you was the next morning at work. But then we even say, okay, well, the same with kids. My son's in third grade here in the U.S., so when he leaves school, when I left third grade, there was no way for anybody to get in touch with me without going through my parents. Zero. No way. My son is accessible through his video games, through his phone, through his tablet. All of his friends can get in touch with him. I imagine that if a bully wanted to get in touch with him, that would be not too hard to do. So there's no compartmentalization between work and life. And so the balance of the two is not really what we're seeking. Balance meaning equal. I don't want an equal work life and personal life. I want my personal life to be much more than my work life. And so I think this idea of balance comes about when we aren't living the life that we choose, that we want. And we feel like it's out of balance because we go to work doing this thing for the paycheck that doesn't fulfill us. It doesn't bring us joy. It's a toxic work environment. My boss is a jerk. I'm being nagged all the time. And then I get home at 7 o'clock and my boss calls me while I'm eating dinner with my family and ruins dinner with my wife. And and that's an exaggerated circumstance. But I think the most important way to start is to reverse engineer what you want your life to be, including how much money. We've gotten to the point where we think, we have to be millionaires to even be successful or be happy or be able to take care of ourselves. And in some ways that may be true, but I think if you really want an eye opener, I want you to think about your best day, like in your life, not just in recent past. It could be in recent past, but think about your best day where you were just happy, head to toe, smiling. It was a great day. It's like, man, if I could live one day over again, that would be the day. So pick that day and then ask yourself, well, what was it about that day? And for me, I have this really important day, and we'll take relationships out of it. So no offense to my wife or my son, I would never do anything without them moving forward. But there was this one day where I was with my friends. We're driving up the coast in the summertime, going to see a concert that was outside on the water. We stopped by the store. We bought a couple CDs. We cashed our paychecks. So we had cash on hand for the night's festivities. The sun was out, the music was loud, not a worry in the world beyond what we were doing in that day. And I think for most people, something similar might come up. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, how much did that day cost? How much was it to fund that day? And I think back and I was like, okay, well, wow, okay, concert tickets, probably $100. Okay, great, $100 for concert tickets, great. We probably spent $50 or $60 in gas to get there. We'll factor another 50. So we're going through all this thing, and I'm like, basically for $500, I can have this day that is in my memory as like best day ever. But in my brain, I've got to have $1 million to have this best life ever. The math doesn't add up when you really anchor in and say, what kind of life do you desire? Are you working for a bigger box to live in so that everyone thinks you live in the nice neighborhood and you've got the best house? Are you driving the fancy car? You have a butler, a chauffeur? It's like, that's okay. All of that is great. I love all those things. I have friends that have those things and they're happy. They're fine. They're doing great. Right? But when you reverse engineer and say, wow, you know what? Based on what I know about me, it doesn't take a whole lot of money to fund a really good life. It doesn't take the $1 million, $2 million, the mogul status. I can really, and now I'm liberated. Now I can really reverse engineer that strategy for this balance thing that I'm looking for. It's not balance at all. I want my life to mean something. I want to matter. I want to work in purpose. I want to have as many of those best day evers as I can. What does that look like? And then I become free and I say, I don't need to have $1 million business. In fact, I didn't grow when my son was in the hospital to really last year, I didn't grow my business at all. It stayed exactly the same. Didn't grow at all because I had decided I'm not in a grow my business season. I'm in a maintain it. We're not going to drop below this line so that we can live and survive and do all the things we do. But I think when you look at that work-life balance, most people have not done that level of work. They simply say, my boss is nagging me and I want more balance doing the things I love. And that's great. But what we're really saying is, I'm now doing something I don't like, and I need to have this mean so much more so that I can tolerate this. And I think that's where we go wrong. But if you can reverse engineer and really decide, based on that best day ever kind of thing, how much did that day cost you? Like mine is in my 20s. I'm about to turn 50. So my best day ever was 25 years ago. But it's still in my brain. It's my best day ever. And it didn't cost a lot of money. So how much do I need moving forward to really live a good life? And that's where I advise people to start all the time, because it's not that you don't go for that goal, still go for that goal, but realize you're going to be happy at this goal and your big goal's up here. And if you can crack the code on being happy at that goal, the bigger goal is going to mean so much more. So I think that's when it comes to work-life balance, I think that's where people kind of get confused about it, and they think that it requires so much more than it requires. And we compartmentalize things and compare the two things, and really it's like my work is part of my life. It identifies for a lot of people, it identifies how they know me. They know me as a consultant, they know me as a coach, they know me as a business, an entrepreneur. They know me as that. And so if I don't make that part of who I am, then I struggle with these two personalities that are conflicting. And when I just shed that, then everything comes into harmony, and I can be the same person all day long and not worry about it.
And it's interesting that your calling is to be a coach, but obviously that's not everyone's calling. No. So I'm wondering how our listener can, combine their personal life goals with their professional life goals? What are the kind of building blocks and tools that we can use to make sure that the two are going in the same direction, like you said, so that we can have more of those perfect days while still working and while still making money?
Good question. And I think most people do this in what I would consider a reverse order as well, is they accept the career or the job, and then they decide what life they can afford from that point, instead of deciding what life do I want and how do I fund that life. So it's like we're giving ourselves the leftovers, the scraps. If I work this job and it's requiring 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, great. I take that out first, and then, all right, now we got to take our sleep out. All right, great. And so we're viewing it like, well, whatever's left over, then I decide what I do with my hour or 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is. And I think if we reverse that thinking and really decide what kind of life we want, and then decide what kind of work funds that life, now you're getting into your purpose. Without getting too cliche about it, I think we are predestined to do something that serves a bigger good, a greater good. And if all we're doing is giving ourselves scraps of our time, meaning when I'm done doing the thing for other people, then I'll go do my thing, that's when we kind of get in this conflicted moment of, I don't like this. Even though the work is meaningful, there's just no balance there. And everyone that gets on, you've been on a plane before, and you know what they do in the emergency briefing. They tell you to put, the oxygen mask on you first, and everyone says that. But if you really take that and say, okay, well, that's good, and I see the value in that. If there's an emergency situation and I'm passing out from smoke inhalation, I can't help anyone. Well, great. That's exactly what we're talking about. If you're not taking care of your time, how can we expect you to take care of other people's time, including your kids, including your partner in life, including your health, including your business? If I'm not feeling fulfilled as a person, as a man, how can I be a good entrepreneur? Like, how? It just doesn't, for me, it doesn't work that way. And I think when you decide what kind of life you want to live, for me, it's all about time. I want the most time. Like, I pick my son up from school every day, every single day. I pack his lunch. I drop that. You can't buy that time from me. I've decided, like, that time is not for sale. And so once you decide that, then you say, okay, well, what job allows me to leave in the middle of the afternoon to go pick my son up? What can I do? Let me make the list. And there aren't very many, unfortunately, but there are some. And I think that's really where you get into this idea of working in your purpose, because it's not working in your purpose, it's existing in your purpose throughout the whole spectrum of your life. But if you decide what life you want first and then find the work that funds that life, you're going to enjoy it a lot more.
And does that feed into your idea of life profit?
It does, because I think it's really easy. I've studied numbers for a long time. I was in corporate, and we had a meeting every month, and it was about a 4-hour meeting, and all we did was look at the numbers and explain the numbers. And that's valuable in business. But we don't do the same thing in our life. Like, what is the profit on your day today? What do you get? Outside of the money, what do you get? If you're going to decide to go to work, when I decided to do this podcast, one is because I really like the podcast. I think you're an excellent interviewer, an excellent host. You're in a different part of the world than me, and I think that's, so there was a lot more than just, I'm going to get a clip so that I can push it out on social media and people will think I'm doing this thing, right? It's like, no, I want to meet Sam. I want to have a conversation with Sam, and I want to see if he thinks that I might have something of value for his audience, and so that was the profit. It's like, wow, I get to share my story, I get to make a connection, maybe it becomes a friendship, maybe it becomes a business partnership, maybe it's just I become a huge fan and I just really like everything Sam puts out in the world. And all of that is profit to me. All of that is like, wow, that was worth the time that we spent making this possible. And so I think there is an element of that. If I go to work outside of the money, what do I get? What do I contribute? Do I feel like I'm helping? Do I feel like I matter? Do I feel like I'm working in my potential? Are we utilizing my skills, or am I just phoning it in every day and going through the motions and waiting for that day to retire or to die or whatever I'm waiting for? And life profit is about going back to that best day ever and saying, best day ever being a 10, worst day ever, which in this case it would be driving down the coast with the windows down, listening to music, versus balled up on the bathroom floor in a pediatric cancer hospital, where does today fall in that spectrum for me personally? And not every day is best day ever, but every day should have an element of profit from it. And I do think that that's something that we don't often consider is, if I take a break and go walk barefoot in my garden, some people might say, well, you just wasted 15 minutes. You could have been productive. And my argument is that was the most productive thing I could have done. Like the thing I do next will be exponentially better because of that time. And that's the real profit, is that I got to walk barefoot through my garden, not that I did my best in the meeting. It's that. So I think the focus that we have when it comes to our life profit is beyond money, beyond accolades, beyond recognition, beyond fame and fortune. It really is like, when you look at the people you love, and hopefully everyone has at least one person they can say, wow, I just love that person. I love everything they're about, and they know me better than anybody. Like, I think if you look at that scenario and you say, every day I'm going to look at that person and ask them if they're proud of me today. That person's not going to ask you how much money you made today. They don't care. They don't care. My wife, she cares about how much money I make. Obviously, we've got a mortgage, all the things. But when I'm sitting at the dinner table, what is she more concerned with? She's more concerned with that. How do you feel? Do you feel happy? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel like you matter? Do you feel heard? Do you feel seen? Do you feel loved? And then like question 19 is, how much money did we make today? And so it's those prioritization of your life can only profit so much if all you're focused on is the bottom line in business. The business won't be what you thought it was, because we get into this for time and money, and the first thing we give away is time and money as entrepreneurs. And normally the first thing we give away is time, because we don't have any money yet. So we give all of our time to making the money, and we just never claim it back, which means our life profit is negative. We're at a negative life profit. Our P&L in our business might be soaring. We might be doing, crazy percentage on the profit on the business side, but in life we're negative, and we know that. So I think if we can look at our life like a business P&L and compare and say, how was my performance today? Did my life profit grow, or did it shrink, and why? What happened? I think that's very important.
And this conversation is kind of centered around self-awareness, being able to set goals for yourself, improve yourself, be a better husband, father, mother, daughter, whatever, just being a better person in general. And one thing that I've kind of picked up on here is that this is a never-ending journey, but it's also something that you kind of can go into with the focus of making your life the best it can be. Whatever point you decide to start this journey, the whole goal is to live your best and most enjoyable life. And one thing I want to ask you, Kevin, is something that I ask every guest, but I feel like you'll have a really unique answer to this, because you've had so much turbulence in your life and you're constantly helping other people improve their lives. And the thing I want to ask you, Kevin, is what is it about what you do that brings you the most joy?
It's, I've asked myself that a lot, because that is, when I asked the question, why am I doing this? That was ultimately the question I was asking. I wasn't asking, why am I doing that? I was asking exactly what you just asked me, and it took me probably a year to get to that point. And I have a lot of scenarios where I say, wow, I feel like I really changed the trajectory of that particular entrepreneur. But because we were able to do that work, the people they serve now, their trajectory has changed. So you think of the ripple effect. And, it sounds, at face value, it sounds very arrogant to say I'd like to positively impact 1 million people in my lifetime. It sounds very arrogant to say that. And all I can think of when I say that out loud is someone standing in front of a huge crowd of people and trying to connect with each one of them, and how long I can only think of that. But, when during the COVID years in 2020, I had a teacher come to me, and she'd been teaching for a long time, and she was really good at teaching, and she was teaching, elder kids. And we created a business, but she didn't want to teach anymore. It was too tough. It was too hard. It was actually making her the kind of mother she didn't want to be, the kind of wife she didn't want to be. And so we created this business around what she already knew. And in about 6 or 8 months, it grew to be like a multi-6-figure business, where she had now exponentially increased her income, but she was also at home when her daughters got out of school. Like, she was off of work. She was done with work. And I just think back to moments like that, and I'm like, that wasn't important for her nor me. I get joy saying her daughters now have a different compass that they can view their professional life. They don't have to go to work and punch someone else's clock unless they want to. They choose that. And so the joy that I get is really working with people who have a bigger impact on the people around them and are actually going to put it into practice. And my son all the time talks about that. Even at 9, he's, I'm in my office, and so he knows that when this door's closed, Daddy's working. But he also knows that I can pop out at any minute and say, let's play a game real quick, or let's go throw the football in the yard. Let's pass the ball. Let's do something like that. And that brings me the most joy, is when people claim that back for the people they love, when they say, hey, last week I ate dinner with my family 5 nights in a row. I get so much joy out of that, because I know that those little eyes that are watching us, even if it's a role model scenario, it's changing their perception of the world. When I was growing up, Dad worked hard. He provided us a great life. He worked a lot. He was stressed a lot. And so I thought, that's just, to have a career, you have to be stressed. You have to work a lot. You have to complain about your bosses and your partners. That was just the environment that he was in at that time. And I'm grateful he was, because it led him to other things, but that I was fortunate enough to see. But it's like, can I change that in my son, where he sees Dad not being stressed about work, but still having plenty of resources to live a comfortable life? That's the joy. So the working, oddly enough, it's not, and I do see a lot of coaches go on about, we're doing this much revenue, or I built a multi-7-figure coaching business, or I've gotten all these results and stuff like that. And I think for me to get an accurate testimonial, you would have to interview my clients' children. And if you interviewed my clients' children, that would bring me more joy than anything, as far as the work that we do and what it means as far as the world moving forward.
Where can the people find you online?
Oh, well, Sam, I'm no secret. I'm on all the usual social media platforms. My website is probably the best. It's mynextcrest.com. And that's kind of where you can learn all about me. It'll have links to all my social media, depending on which platform you prefer. But that is by far the best, and it'll kind of give you a little more about the Next Crest movement and what we're about.
Thank you for listening to People Explained. New episodes come out every Monday. We would appreciate it if you gave us a review on Apple Podcasts and shared this episode with a friend.